Hey everyone, welcome to the episode of the Unpack show with Anandh today. So I'm excited to sit down with a guest. Brett has built a lot of reputation for bringing both depth and breadth to the conversation that he has been part of. You can talk to him about almost anything. What stands out to me most about Brett is the grit and the persistence that he brings to his work. He doesn't start initiatives. He stays with them, making sure the organization actually sees the results. And he does it with all genuine passion. I've seen it firsthand. So the topic for today is unpacking the passion in transforming an organization. Brett, before I dive into the topic, do you want to share a few words or introduction and we can straight away jump into the topic?
Of course. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. And you are correct. I have a lot of passion. I might have a little too much passion at times, and we can talk a little bit about that. But for folks who might be listening who don't know who I am, so am a technology and digital leader. You can tell by my hair. I'm about 51 years old, so I've been doing this for a while. I have experience across many, many different companies, size of companies, Fortune 50 all the way to Fortune 2000, in multiple industries: hospitality, CPG, retail, banking, and broader financial services. And you're correct. I absolutely have a passion on a lot of topics, and we'll unpack that a little bit on your show. But excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I feel honored to have you as a guest for my show. I had this idea and I reached out to you. Thanks for accepting and thanks for taking the time to be part of the show. Brett, I want to dive into probably the nuances of like people don't wake up one day and decide, okay, let's transform, let's get into a transformation journey, right? It often starts with a lot of tension, right, that you cannot ignore. A lot of people don't talk about that. A lot of people talk about the success part of it, but can you take us back to that first spark that you had when you realized something had to change?
Sure. Um, I've experienced both, and I'll answer your direct question, but I might go back a little bit to what creates the tension in the first place. Um, so there's either tension from the world is changing very rapidly around you, and the tension is external to the organization or the product or the service. And that's probably that was kind of my first experience, and I'll explain that here in a second. The other tension is kind of internal tensions.
Hmm.
Um, and so my first experience, was really more of an external. It was an external tension, right? So I happened to graduate from college at what I would argue the best possible time in the world, in the mid to late '90s, when kind of this idea of the internet and connectivity and uh, not quite in the mobile era just yet. But it was very clear the external transformation that was happening around society with technology evolution was creating tension for businesses.
Hmm.
They didn't know what to do. Should they invest? Is it real? Is it not? Um, and we all remember the .com growth and bust, because these things have cycles and they have time frames that play out over time. But that was an external example of an external tension that was obviously today. And you look back in hindsight, you're like, well, that was obvious, but it wasn't so obvious back then, right? But it was fairly obvious to me, right? It was fairly
Yeah.
obvious, to me, um, that once this world gets connected, once business is transacted through that connectivity, i.e., internet and digitalization, the nature of businesses and models and organizations was going to change. So that's an example of an external tension that I think most of us intuitively understand at this point. So that's where mine started, right? Just I was pretty young. I saw that the world was going to change, and I wanted to be a part of helping organizations through that, not just kind of the existing model, making it slightly
Hmm.
better.
Hmm.
Because it's hard to ignore. It was hard to ignore that, because I didn't know exactly how it would play out. None of us did. None of us have a crystal ball. but it was very obvious that someone was going to have to, some group of people, someone and group of people were going to have to figure that out. So that's a little bit of where my early starting point comes from. Early passion came from, I guess.
Sure.
Um, I don't know if that would make sense. On the other side, if you think about the tensions that are not external factors to across industries, there's usually internal tensions, right? And unfortunately, in transformations, people wait till they don't start with this idea of let's go do a transformation. They usually wait too
Yeah.
long, and then which is why
Yep.
the term transformation exists, because you've got to like, we're a little bit late, we're feeling behind, the industry is passing us by, consumers are passing us by, competitors are passing us by. I need help. I want to transform. We need to transform.
Right.
Um, and that creates, it's clearly a result of some external pressures, but usually that internal tension gets high, um, because the sense of urgency then is really, really fast.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
I've been a part of and seen both of those.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. So I think we talked a lot about transformation. I want to go back to the statement that that I made in the beginning of the show. Right, the passion is what is keeping you moving. I think you do it with grit and persistence. But I've seen it firsthand. Where does your passion for change come from? And more importantly, how do you keep it alive when things gets really really hard?
Well, I started the root passion, and I gave, I answer this a little bit in the last example. That starting passion is some of it just my natural disposition, right? My natural disposition is what is going to happen in the world, what is happening in the world, how do I help whatever team, organization I'm a part of be more relevant in the future. So passion for the result, right? Passion for the, I use analogies and examples a lot, so I apologize. But um, these stats that always freaked me out when I was younger, like, hey, half of the Fortune 500 companies are no longer in the Fortune 500 in 20 years.
Hmm.
Uh, and like, well, if I'm going to make an organization better, right, and help an organization have, you know, a span of decades, then I have to have passion around that, or you have to have passion around that, because gravity is pulling you in the opposite way. Status quo, it's fine, it's good, um, and the reality is that somebody's got to do it, right? So I saw it. I have a passion to do it, but my goal in all of that wasn't to like lead transformations or
Yeah.
be passionate leader. I am those things because that's just my disposition. But the actual passion comes from how do you help organizations either proactively or some cases reactively prepare and be relevant, for decades to come. Because everyone wants to be a part of those teams. Everyone wants to be a part of those. Everybody wants to be a part of those products and services. Um, and so rallying and having passion around that was just observing that was someone's got to do that, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the other is just I just naturally gravitate towards those types of things, right? My brain, which has cons, we can unpack that too on this Unpack show. Uh, but my natural disposition is somebody's got to do it. Um, some group of people, not just individuals, have to do it, and I, um, I enjoy it, right? I
Yeah.
fundamentally find joy not in the disruption part, just to be a disruptor, but to help make sure that organizations and teams, and again, products and services, survive.
Yep.
Because we know the odds are not in, not in your favor if you stand still.
Yep, yep. But I want to go back to what you just touched on, right? When you are in a transformation journey, it might feel like you are the only one who's seeing that shift, or who sees what needs to shift in a way. But my question is like back to the internal tension or the external tension. How did you start building momentum and getting others to believe in that vision with you? Because it's not one person's job. It is a team effort.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a village, right? But you got to find your people, right?
Yep.
And so, just use an example from retail. Um, this is back to my first example, where I kind of found my calling, if you will. Um, there were 95% of the retail organizations that I was a part of was, I would call, skeptical. Right? No one's ever going to buy things online. No one's going to want to buy shoes. They got to go to a fitting room. No one's going to buy jeans. No one's going to buy furniture. Again, kind of
Yep.
comical by today's reality, right? And I wasn't the only one, right? I wasn't the only human being who thought this could impact retail as we know it from a physical, traditionally a physical retail orientation to a digital and online. There were people, right? And so
Hmm.
find your people, right? I mean, I found business executives and technology executives, and they found me as well because they saw my passion and interest and a little bit of skill. I didn't have a ton of skill; I just had a little bit of skill.
Yeah.
And so finding those people, because you need to find them because it takes more than one person or one team, and then how do you connect them? In that case, I was lucky, right? The chairman of the board of a Fortune 50 company had a also saw that this world was going to change and anticipated that and was looking for kind of effectively middle management, some level of leadership to help him um, convince the rest of the organization, put some points on the board, prove to
Yeah.
people. And so finding your people, finding your advocacy is is a answer to that. The other, I think, is it doesn't mean we have the answers, right? I mean, these are not guaranteed things, right?
Hmm.
There was no guarantee. AI is a good example right now. There is no guarantee that on artificial intelligence that it'll all be good, right? There's lots of goodness to it. I'm very bullish on AI, but there's also some bad, and there's also some skepticism, and there's also some fear associated with
Yep.
it. So you
Yep.
find your people, and then you start just putting some points on the board to validate your hypothesis or your thesis or whatever it may be, and then you've got to be flexible enough to change your own opinion on those respective topics as well, because we're not fortune tellers here, or we don't have crystal ball. We just see that the world is changing. So
Right.
finding your people, because it's okay to be skeptical. I think this is one of the fallacies about this is, those skeptical people, they're just stuck, right? They just don't get it. Or, that's not true, right? They have every reason to believe what we've taught them and what we've shown them, whether it's leadership or society. What we taught them, what they could see and feel, was physical retail. And banking, they could see and feel was physical banking, right? And so that's what they see.
Right.
Um, and so don't try to undermine or discount what they see, because what they see and feel is real, right? But painting a picture of what could be
Hmm.
and then showing what that might be tends to, with your people, right? With your people, not collectively, tends to help them overcome. Um, we might be wrong, but let's just try it and see if there's a there on the other side of it.
Yeah, I think leading through skepticism is not an easy task. Like, I think I've seen you going through that one. But Brett, I'm curious to know. A lot of people think like real change or transformation means challenging the ways of working, the legacy ways of working, right? Some people think like you have to completely change it. Some people will say like, let's keep whatever works now. Let's see what is the future going to look like. But I've seen you, you've done this in a very unique way. Like you always have a good way of honoring the past while we still push boldly into the future. Like, what would you provide an advice, like, for those who are listening here? How did you balance those, right? Honoring the past versus taking bold steps into the future?
Yeah, I mean, by definition, transformations, change, preparing for the future, whatever word you want to use. You know me well enough. I don't love buzzwords, right? Um, but whatever that means implies that what you're doing today has to change a little bit or a lot.
Yep.
And the trick is to figure out what needs to change a little bit and what needs to change a lot.
Yep.
Um, and not try to change everything, because there's probably good legitimate reasons for some of that stuff to be held true. And I'm not referring to processes, right? I think processes are probably the one thing that we all just need to let go of, right? There's always evolutions for how a process works or how our organizational mechanisms work, right? Those should be the most variable things we do. There's new and improved ways. That's not what you have to protect. What you
Right.
have to protect is the essence of the organization, the culture of the organization, the the values of the organization, right? So I'll use a Target example. Everyone is right now, Target's, in an interesting spot. I haven't been there in a decade.
Hmm.
So I can't comment about what it is today or how it feels today, but I can tell you back in the day, um, Target meant something, but you couldn't look up a definition of what Target meant, right? But everybody knew we might need to evolve for how we do retail. And our assortment might need to change. Our distribution and how we sell might need to change. The processes for how we do technology or software might need to change. But we should probably keep Target because that is worth protecting, right? That don't mess with things at work, right?
Sure.
And so that is an example of finding the things that you need to protect, um, and protect them, because transforming and getting rid of the things that are working or that are inherent to the DNA of the organization, um, there's risk of that because you might transform to a place where you lose what made you successful in the first place. But it's
Right.
typically the other things that you want to be more disruptive on. So that's not minimize. That's let's push ourselves, right? Ways of working is a classic example. I have a ton of passion around this one. Um, we just know there's better ways, right? We
Yeah.
know there are better ways of working, right? Clarifying ownership, empowering leadership, servant leadership. That's a better way of leading. That's a better way of executing. It's almost undebatable, because your teams are happier, your organization gets more things done, your transformational successes starts to put points on the board as you iterate. Those are not worth protecting, right? Those are
Right.
worth leaning into. Um, and it doesn't, getting back to my first point, what it doesn't mean is what we were doing before was wrong, right? We
Correct.
taught
Right.
leaders to be a certain type of leader 20, 30, 40 years ago. We taught people, how to do projects or, how to do process work, right? And so while we need to help them realize there's maybe a better way, we also can't just say, why the heck were you doing that? Right. Because
Yeah.
most of the time, the people who are responsible for why they were doing that is us
Yes.
as leaders who created those things. Right. And so
Right.
on a go forward basis, I've learned this all the hard way, figure out what's movable and flexible and moldable and figure out what's to stay true to. So you don't disrupt the team or the culture, the value proposition or the secret sauce of a particular organization, and put all your energy into the things that that should be moved because they're not. Those were not the ingredients that made the company successful. Right.
Right. Right.
It was just a process or way of working that we all did, and now we can do it better.
Right. Right. Brett, I'm going to put you on spot. This is my last thing to you. And I think we talked about this in the past as well, right? You coached me in how to be patient and how to take pragmatic approach, right, when we are in the transformation journey. But and I'm curious, like often the work is invisible for a long time, right, before the results show. I'm curious to know what would help someone to feel motivated, right, when it feels like nothing was changing fast enough, because it's a hard balance. When you have a passion
Yeah.
and patience, how do you balance those out?
First of all, I think the folks who have worked with me in the past are going to laugh that I'm giving advice on patience because patience is probably the number one thing I've worked on for my entire career, um, and still work on it to this day. But the root of your question is how do you have kind of what I call fortitude, right? I mean, you have to have some fortitude, right?
Yep.
You have to have passion. You have to lead through the change. You have to put proof point, and to your point, the results don't often show up for years, sometimes decades. And so you can't rely on just the results, right? You have to put the small incremental proof points on the board. I might disagree a little bit with the framing that work isn't visible. I actually think that's like what you have to do. You actually have to make the work visible.
Sure.
Results might not be visible for a while, but you can make the work visible. And by helping the organization understand the work that is required to achieve the outcomes that they aspire to do, which is a trick in and of itself. There's
Yeah.
a lot of discipline required in making that happen. Um, you can build this, conviction and fortitude to stay the course, even though the ultimate outcome isn't quite going to happen for like 3 to 4 years, right? Or 5 to 10 years at times.
Right.
What I try to do for myself personally, because we all go through this, I know you do, there's good days and there's bad days. There's frustrating days. There's, pull your hair out, but I can't do that anymore days. You just got to remind yourself, right? And so, I try to do this, and I try to do this, at least every 6 months to a year. I just sit down and say, are we closer to the end game than we were a year ago, right? Are we
Right.
closer to the culture? Are we closer to the ways of working? Are we closer to the outcomes? And if you are, you stay the course, right? Despite the rough days and the bumps, and I can't see it yet, or this feels disruptive,
Yep.
because you're going to go through that, right? I mean, there's nothing in life that's worth it. That's easy. I mean, I believe that, right? If it's worth it, it's probably hard. Or else it's probably not worth it. Um, and so if it's worth it, you bring the passion, right? If by definition, if you want to drive a business model transformation, which I firmly believe most transformations are business model, not just technology, then you have to have the fortitude, and you have to have the perseverance, and you
Yep.
have to help. If you don't have that, you got to look yourself in the mirror, and check yourself, because that doesn't happen in 6 months. It doesn't happen in a year, right? And so, are you calibrated properly? You and I have talked about this. And am I calibrated properly? I've
Right.
had to do this myself. Um, Again, I've tried at least the last decade or two of my career to remind myself that the things that we're trying to do for all these different companies and industries are hard, and they
Yep.
probably take sometimes half a decade to a decade to achieve. Don't get frustrated by that, because it is part of the journey, right? It's part of the transformational journey and the change journey to change business models or process, ways of working. But if that like impatience then leads to judgment, then leads to, I don't, this isn't worth it, isn't worth it. You got to check yourself, right?
Right.
You
Right.
got to check. You got to check yourself. So I try to do that, and I, obviously try to do that with folks I've worked with, like yourself. Because once you actually pause and say, "Okay, I'm frustrated," but at the end of the day, we're not wrong. I mean, we're a heck of a lot closer to the end than we were a couple of years ago. And yeah, we probably knew it was going to take 5 years. It wasn't going to be done in like a year, right? You got to just remind yourself, because in the heat of the battle, people forget.
Right. Right. Well said, Brad. I think the results may take a little bit of time, but we need to make sure that the work is getting visible, which is well said. Again, Brett, I know you are a busy person. Thanks for taking the time. I feel honored to have you as a first guest for my show. Thanks for taking the time, Brett.
Appreciate it. Good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.